I really think in the world of personal development, there has been a missing component to the self.
Mhm.
And I talked about that earlier, mind, body, and emotion, and we keep it all there. But we are mind, body, emotion, and spirit.
Mhm.
And if it may be uncomfortable to use that language, that's okay. It's your innate self. Let's talk about it that way.
Hey, beautiful. Welcome to Naturally Empowered Living, your safe space to guiding you on your unapologetic self awakening journey. This is your weekly sanctuary for waking up from autopilot and transforming the way you approach life through the power of meditation, energetics, and root cause therapy. It is my mission to help you heal unprocessed emotions and release stuck energies by alchemizing your struggle cycles into opportunities for deep self love, awareness, trust, and connection, to return to your innate essence of being, stepping back into your energy of alignment. Because here, we honor all parts of ourselves, the messy and the magic, the shadows and the light, embodying all parts that make you, you. So if you are ready to get to the root of cultivating real change, get cozy, grab your journal and maybe favorite crystals, and let's discover our power within together. Hello, hello. Welcome back to the show, beautiful listeners. Today, I am so honored to welcome a truly unique and inspiring guest to the show, Jules Kuroda. She calls herself a corporate hippie and wanderer. And if you're picturing these vibes of Carmen Sandiego with a deep soul and mission for meaning, you are on the right track. Her passion is helping others just move beyond the ideas that they've held about themselves into a deeper, more fulfilling way of being. And she recently wrote a book called The Innate Self. And I am so excited to learn from her, hear about her book, and truly just I'm just so intrigued about this book and the dimension of the human spirit that I believe that this book dives into. And you bring 8 powerful characteristics into this framework that brings the clarity to the paradoxes of being human and offering us a path towards more holistic, purpose-filled life. So, welcome to Naturally Empowered Living, Jules. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks so much, Jenna. What a great introduction. I'm like, I need that like encapsulated and hang on my was so lovely. So thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. So, can you share with us a little bit more just about yourself, as
Yeah.
surface level, as deep as you feel called, and just what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah. So my life journey, as so many people's kind of life journeys, has not been linear.
Hmm.
And I started out thinking I wanted to be a teacher because I really love helping people learn. And life is funny because it's sometimes like what you say you will do and what you say you will never do get inverted.
Yep.
And so I started out in kind of academia teaching, but got kind of pulled into more nonprofit work where I had a heart for that work. I really was changed by that work. And I think about it as just like this beautiful time of my life where I really understood what it was to be like heart centered
Hmm.
in your professional space. But as so many people who work in nonprofits feel, there was some kind of like emotional burnout. I felt like I was on the receiving end of not being able to actually help with change. And I'm really keen to help like system change. So I went back to school and started to go into the leadership space. So I have my master's in organizational leadership and went into a coaching program. And that like changed my life. I was like, oh, this is what I feel called to do. And now I feel like I have more of the tools to do a little bit of that education with some of the soulfulness and depth that I feel very inclined towards.
Yeah.
So in terms of what led me to write the book, I ended up then in corporate and I was coaching these leaders, and it was so interesting to me because I had sort of this like idea of what the corporate space would be, and people would be so stiff and
Yeah.
cold. And that wasn't at all what I experienced. I experienced leaders who were seeking and, yes, they wanted to know how to like impact their team more, but at the end of these like conversations, they would be like, but what am I doing with my life? And am I really making an impact? And am I using my gifts for good? And these kind of like soulful questions. And I realized we didn't really have a framework to address and to talk about that in social spaces.
Mhm.
And so that's what led me to write the book. The innate self is really supposed to be a framework to help us engage in a conversation that may normally be kept in more religious environments, or we kind of get squirmy sometimes when we start talking about spiritual things. And I'd like to reduce that kind of friction that some people feel towards the space, because it's innate in all of us. We have this thing that wants to look for meaning and purpose and joy and connection. And the more that we can kind of understand that and unpack that, I think the more fulfilled we can live.
That's so beautiful. And I just have to call this out. Tell me if I'm wrong. N8, initially I saw the eight and I'm like, eight characteristics, great. But N8, innate, oh my gosh. I was just, as you're talking, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. Ah,
Thank you. You got it.
that's just like that level deeper, like that deeper connection. And I mean, that's exactly where our conversation is going in terms of connecting to that innate being, that innate soul, spirit of who you are. And I kind of want to stay on your story just for a second, if that's okay, in terms of we're there because you mentioned nonprofit, but I talk a lot about on the show, finding your energy of alignment. And what I mean by that is really knowing, this is your intuition speaking. This is your heart speaking. This is the path I'm meant to be on based on that, not ego, not society, not anything external from you. This is all internal. So, were there any other pivotal moments within, it could be again, as far back as you wish, or from that transition from academic to nonprofit, were there any other situations to where you're like, this is what I'm meant to be doing?
No, it's such a great question, and I love it, because in part I think of life as unfolding.
Yeah,
And I think of ourselves that way too. So when I even talk about my own like career journey, which is a little bit of what we're talking about here, it's in chapters. I think about like, well, I had my chapter where I was pursuing my love of teaching, and I never let go of the love of teaching. And
sure.
that's very, very like evident. As I was writing the book, I was like, I wanted it to be like a guide.
Yeah.
Um, so like I got that little nugget, but maybe the path and the course isn't quite what I wanted. And so I think giving space to let things unfold is a really key thing.
Hmm.
But there were definite moments where I felt like a little tap, like let's pivot a little bit more over here. And I'll share one story, which was working at a nonprofit for a US based organization that was working in Liberia. And we were doing an orphanage like set up with a school there. And so I had gone and was trying to communicate back to the board, like, here are some of the cultural challenges. They were having a lot of challenge kind of understanding and tracking money. And so there were some assumptions based on the kind of Western thinking that of how we operate that we were applying to a very different cultural context of a country that had just come out of civil war.
Hmm.
And we like to label things, so we call it corruption, we call it these things. And it's more nuanced than that. It's like, okay, I understand that perspective, but what was happening is the way money moves in some of these countries is more social. And so yes, you have to give people money to open up doors, and we may not understand that exactly in our linear way. And what I felt like at that moment is I didn't have the right tools to unpack and explore culture and thinking and like psychology,
Hmm.
which was one of those like, oh, I don't know how to convince people. I don't know how to help them think differently. I need something more to be able to do the kind of work that I want to do. And that led me back to school, which was a huge moment for me.
Yeah.
Because I got in my master's program, and I was like, this is not exactly what I'm looking for. And that led me to coaching, right? So these sometimes resistance is is a like it points us in another direction,
Mhm.
that might be just slightly adjacent, but we pick things up along the way, I think, that we carry with us. So,
That's so beautifully said. And I actually had an astrology synastry session yesterday for on myself and my husband. Actually, we're doing like a family synastry, one session every month with a dear friend, and she was sharing, and it's kind of along those same that parallel line of you speak of chapters, that evolution, that constant unfolding, and she was talking same context. The core is so similar, and she was saying like, yes, we have our birth chart, and we're ever like evolving into this birth chart. You're not like maybe yes, you're born, you're pure, you're this beautiful, essence, and then we have all these external, things, right? But we're always evolving into this birth chart. And we might not be expressing this right now, but this is, and it was just so beautifully said in a totally different context than how I speak. I connect with what you're saying in terms of this evolution. And, if we take a pivot, it's not ever a failure. It's just a learning, it's an evolution. And I want to note that too, because if you're listening to the show right now, and if something else kind of resonates, or if you could insert a different type of terminology, or we were talking about this before we recorded,
Mhm.
whatever resonates with you, however you see that piece of we're constantly stepping into ourselves and it's okay to change. And I feel like sometimes that resistance we see as like, oh my gosh, I'm changing, I'm in fault, what's wrong with me? And it's like,
Yeah.
maybe you're actually finding out who you truly are through this.
Yeah. And I think there's something really key to this, which is just the way, one of the things I talk about in the book is like we almost have to get over the thoughts we have about ourselves
Mhm.
because we get so attached to the mind and to the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Mhm.
And that in part is what coaching is all about, right? Like what are those limiting beliefs and really helping you see yourself from different angles. And it's really hard to do that alone. Like I
Yeah.
think that's the power in part of connecting with people and having them reflect things back to you and being in dialogue because it can open your mind. And in the book, I talk about the mind is the frenemy because I think it's
Mhm.
so wonderful and it can connect us with purpose. It can help us solve things and it's a great tool. But I think we're maybe just a little too in love with our minds
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
where we just attach so heavy to it. And the mind is also very judgmental and likes to protect us. And so seeing ourselves as more than just our thoughts,
Yeah.
I think is so key.
Yeah, that is. And that's a good segue into how you describe, what do you describe the innate self? Innate. I love it. I can't get over it. How do you describe, that your innate sense of being?
Yeah, it's a good big question. I think about, so first I'll start with the innate. Innate technically stands for our higher nature.
Mhm.
And that has 8 characteristics, but it's also the double entendre. It is
Yeah.
innate in all of us. And I think, one of the things I talk about at the very beginning is like we have these characteristics that are these 8 characteristics, but there's also qualities of our innate being. And I use innate being and innate self very interchangeably because you have to be in it. It's not a mental framework so much as it is like your character and your creativity and meaning. Like these are some of those characteristics. But one of the things that I think is so important to recognize is that it is innate in all of us. So while it's individual, it's also that thing that connects us to each other.
Hmm.
And I talk about that as like stepping into the thread of connectivity. It's like this thing that runs throughout humanity. And this is one of those like aha moments that I've had in my life and you sometimes we feel it most when we can't actually communicate with people
Hmm.
because we don't have the language, right? Which language kind of like lives in our minds. And so when we don't have that, how do we communicate? And when I was working in the refugee community, I was teaching English to people who didn't speak any English. And so you had to find other ways of connecting.
Hmm.
And there were so many beautiful moments, like laughter is a universal language. It's one of those things that lives in our spirit. It's not a mental thing. It's a deeper thing. And those like experiences allow us to kind of step into that thread of connectivity as a part of our innate being. And so that's one of the things I would say about it is it's something we individually want to cultivate and think about, but it's also something that is so powerful to recognize that we all share.
Hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of the 8 characteristics. Can you
Yeah.
expand a little further on what those are?
Yeah, sure. So I start by talking about character, and character was actually it was hard to write because I think it's really loaded, and I think also we don't talk about character so much culturally today. I joke in the book that there's sort of it's kind of an antiquated Jane Austen sort of notion of what does it mean to think about your character, but
Yeah.
it's really your values, the moral code with which you live by, and how you handle ethical situations. And ethics is all about the gray. And this is the bedrock of where we need to start. It's a part of, how do you want to live your life,
Mhm.
and who do you want to become through your life? And if you don't start with kind of an anchor in that, then it's really easy to chase image over substance. I talk about that a lot. And I think we're living in a time of, we're very self-conscious of how we look. Social media has not helped with that.
Yeah.
And and that's, that is what it is. I would just say that if we get so caught up in that we don't take a look within, then we've lost something really huge. And so character kind of helps us reground into that aspect of self. So that's where it starts.
Mhm.
And then we go into contribution. And I think contribution is one of those things that, from an executive coaching perspective, comes up a lot, which is, what are the skills and the gifts that I have to offer? And am I able to utilize that? And who doesn't want to feel like they're contributing? I
Yeah.
think it's one of those things, like, we all want to be able to use the things we're good at,
Mhm.
to give back, to give to others, to share. And so being able to step into that is key. And we can cultivate those things. And then that leads us into connection, which is like the third characteristic. And I spend probably the most of the book talking through connection because it's so key. And I think it's something we are really socially unpacking right now, like our issues with loneliness and anxiety and our lack of connection. And obviously, the pandemic has not helped with that. Then post-pandemic, there's been some residual, but it's also, I think, I tie that it's also connected to where we live in the mind so much.
Yeah.
We're so stuck on ideology and our ideological differences, and
Mhm.
um, it's a heightened time at that. So how do we get past that and cultivate the connection? I think, but I do think there's something really important that we need to look at, and I love the work of Jonathan Haidt, who's come out with the. Have you read the Anxious Generation stuff? It's really,
No.
really good. Oh my
No.
gosh, it's so good. So now they're actually able to like track and study the effects of over inducing technology too young for kids, and what does it do to them psychologically. And you can do longitudinal studies, like looking back at kids in the 80s versus
Yeah.
looking at kids today. And it's very I hope that it's a wake up call for us, just on technology is like another one of those things. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it connects us in so many ways, but it shouldn't be substituted for in-person
Right.
depth,
Right.
right? It's transactional in nature. And so if all of the interacting that we're doing is more transactional, it's like eating junk food.
Right.
It doesn't fill you up in a nutritious way, and
Yeah.
it will start to impact you. So everything in moderation is one of those
Yeah.
things for me on the technology side. And I do talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that. Yeah, I think we need to wrestle with it a little bit more socially. One of the things I do talk about in the book is, like, we're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
That is what it is to be human. It's how do we learn from those mistakes and
Yeah.
change and grow from them. So I think there will be lots of mirror moments for us,
Yeah.
as we look, but ideally we can learn a little along the way. So, we're trying to hedge those things for our kids, but it's hard.
Yeah. It
It is.
is. And I mean, I'm glad that you brought up like that power of repair. That was actually a few episodes back, I was talking about the power of repair and connection as a parent. And I
Mhm.
was sharing very vulnerably, transparently with struggles, like sibling struggles that we're going through right now.
Mhm.
And the heightened emotions of me, even. And I mean, that's what I do for work. Like I help people,
Mhm.
work with their emotions, somatic embodiment. And we're not perfect. Like we cannot heal our way out of being human. Like we're still going to have our own struggles. We're still going to have our own, those cycles, those patterns, that awareness coming up. And I say it as like it's present life struggles, right? I'm helping you release all that gunk, all that from the upbringing, the traumatic events, everything from your past so you could release it, but you're not going to not have anxious moments. You're not going to not have stressful moments within your life. It's those tools of how to release them in the moment, process them in those moments or in the near future moments and to go on from there.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying is so key. And Going back to one of the questions you asked earlier around like, why did I write this book?
Mhm.
What you just shared, I think is so important, and what I see like in the field of coaching is there are tools to help us understand our mind, and to unpack our thinking. And we are socially so much more comfortable talking about the craziness that we all have that lives in our heads, right?
Mhm.
We've been talking about emotional intelligence for the last 40 years or so, especially in corporate spaces. Like that's become very comfortable to talk about. Somatic work has become much more understood, I would say, just over maybe the last 10 years,
Yeah.
like where you hold tension in your body and how it's connected to your emotions. And what we haven't had is a framework to talk about the fourth aspect of us, which is not your mind, your body, or your emotions, it's your spirit.
Mhm.
And so when you get stuck on something like, oh, I'm feeling really scared and I want to be courageous. Let's talk about courage for a moment,
Mhm.
because courage I think about as being brave plus, plus plus. So there's a little
Yeah.
bit of sacrifice, there's a little bit of willingness to put yourself on the line in order to do something bigger than just for yourself. And
Mhm.
that's how I think about courage. So if we stay in a conversation about why you're scared, that could be psychological or that could be emotional,
Mhm.
but what you may be feeling is actually something more existential. Like, well, I don't know how I fit into life if I do this thing, or I don't know how I'm going to fit into my family, and I'm worried about that rejection, and I don't know who I am in that space. Like that's substantial.
Yeah.
And it's all the pieces, right? And so I think having some language and frameworks to help us understand that piece too, it helps us understand ourselves more holistically. And that to
Yeah.
me is what it's all about is, when we're blocked mentally, can we get into the somatic work because it helps us move through it? When we're blocked spiritually, how do we handle that? So
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's the connection between it all. Like they all work synergistically. And I
Mhm.
mean, I talk a lot about like our chakras, our energy centers, but connecting that to our nervous system. Like I view that in the same capacity because it's still a part of us. And it's just I love the parallels, the down to the core. I feel core meanings of like everything, like it all comes down to the cores. It's just how we speak of it, how we talk about it. And I love how you brought up that fourth element piece because it is the embodiment of all of us. Hmm.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, so much of the journey, like, yeah, we joke a little bit, my husband and I joke a little bit about, I think sometimes we're scared of the big questions, like, what's the
Yeah.
meaning of life? Like, we're scared of that question. And, he and I joke, like, the meaning of life is to discover the meaning of life.
Yeah.
And it's like it's the journey. It's not just about the destination, but I think the more that we can allow ourselves to be whole beings,
Hmm.
the more we feel that alignment you were talking about at the
Yeah.
beginning, which I think is so key to living a
Yeah.
fulfilled life.
Yeah, because it's gosh, like it's so easy to get caught in the hustle, caught in the rat race, caught in the day to day when
Yeah.
we allow ourselves a space to zoom out a little bit. And exactly what you said, I'm a sucker for like those cliche quotes. Like because again, like all those quotes that you like heard your parents say or you read growing up and you're like, that's so silly or that's so, XYZ. It's all truth, it's all truth. It's about the journey, not the destination, but it is. Like it's
Yeah.
so funny. I always come back to that because I'm like, yeah, actions speak louder than words, like all these things.
Oh, Jenna, I made a joke in my book. Like I am such a good like I'm such a sucker for platitudes. And one of the ones that had such a lasting impact on my psyche was from my eighth grade history class. It was like two kittens purring, nestling, and it was like the willingness to listen is the beginning of all understanding. And
Oh,
it's so
yeah.
ingrained in so yeah, they're
Yeah.
cliches for a reason.
I know. Oh my gosh,
Nuggets
I
in
love
there.
it. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so tangent, going back to eight
Yes.
characteristics, we have character,
Yes.
contribution, connection.
Yes. And then
Beautiful.
then we get into creativity. And I think creativity is one of those really interesting ones because as I talk about working with executives, a lot of times they can kind of shut down around the idea of creativity because the mental image that they have around creativity is artistic creativity, which is only one type of creativity. And so one of the things in my book is I have a quiz on what kind of a creative are you? We are all inherently creators. We create our thoughts, we create our bodies, we create our children, we create our relationships, we create meaning, we are creators. But we don't think about creativity so holistically. We tend to think about it as a very specific kind of niche. And so thinking about, are you a functional creative? And functional creatives are people who are like engineers. They like to figure things out and design things, right? Versus an innovator versus an artistic person. And so there are four different types. And so understanding the kind of creator you are can also, I naturally maybe more inclined towards. You can have multiple modalities of creativity, but I think it can open up that your mind to allowing yourself to explore more of that. And I think creativity is one of those spaces in us that is where we experience a lot of joy.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about the concept of flow. Most of the time people get into what we call flow energy when they are in their lane of creativity.
Yeah.
And so time kind of changes. There's a different level of peace that's and or serenity that tends to be a part of that. And stepping into that kind of energy, I think is so powerful.
Mhm.
And but sometimes our minds are blockers. So if we can understand it a little bit better, it gives us some space to play.
Yeah. And that's exactly what you just said. That's how I describe your energy of alignment. Like when you're in that state of flow, like you're feeling the peace, the clarity, the connection, the just the balance of the acceptance piece.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that. So
Yeah.
beautiful.
Um, so from creativity, then I talk about generosity.
Mm.
And it's interesting. I mentioned earlier contribution, and I think sometimes we think about contribution and generosity as similar things, but I think about them as quite distinct because contribution is really like what are the skills and the gifts that you have to give, and it's about you. And generosity is about what flows out of you. That's about the other person.
Mhm.
And I think we tend to think about generosity as maybe being financial, like how much money are you giving, but it's also generosity of spirit, generosity of your time, of action, generosity through kindness. Like these are things that when we practice them, we feel like bigger versions of ourselves. And we often have to kind of work against that sort of more animalistic nature in ourselves. And so generosity is, I think, such a key outlet for us to be able to feel more of that higher nature self.
Mhm.
And so from there we go into gratitude. Gratitude has gotten a lot of PR, I would say,
Yeah.
over the last few years. And I gratitude's an interesting one because I've heard like gratitude is an attitude. But I think about gratitude as being one of those things of recognizing all the things that have been given to you that you don't necessarily deserve.
Mm.
And just sitting in that feeling of abundance. And sometimes we feel gratitude the most after we've gone through something painful.
Mhm.
And like, I'll make it like super simple. Like, when you get a cold or you get sick, you get food poisoning and you're like, oh, I feel so terrible. And 2 or 3 days go by and you feel healthy again. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've been taking my health for granted.
Yeah.
It,
Yep.
right. That's gratitude. So it's also just noticing when you've been given something that you may or may not have worked for. It's just been given to you. And our health is like one of the things that we have. That's such a huge thing, and we feel it as soon as it leaves. But I think practicing gratitude can also be a great way of working through pain.
Mhm.
So talk a bit about that in the book as well.
Yeah. That's so, I mean, because I'm looking outside like at our trees and the breeze blowing the leaves and I mean, tell me if you agree with this. It's like just gratitude to me is almost like slowing down to just pay attention to like
100%.
what is actually, where are we right now? Like it's just, and again, it's a principle teaching, the next generation, like talking to my kids, because we're always like everything, the world is so fast.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, we call it, let's just be. Let's just be for five. Let's take a fiver. We call it a fiver too. Let's take a
Hmm.
fiver and just be
Hmm.
for a minute.
Totally. And I mean, I think you've mentioned something key. Like we were those people that during the pandemic we got an RV and we traveled around and lived outside for a bit. And I talk about it as big nature. When you're around big nature, um, you can't help but feel that presence you're talking about, which makes you feel grateful.
Mhm.
And there's something about that, again, that I talk about how connected we are to the natural world around us. Like we can't live in this world without all of the things that support and sustain us. And
Yeah.
I think we take that for granted. And so the more we can connect to nature, the more we can see how interwoven we are into the world around us and how beautifully designed it is. And we can't eat without the food that is grown. We can't breathe without the air and water. And just being in that, that's what I mean to like these things have just been given.
Yeah.
And so how do we appreciate that and be present to it?
Exactly. Exactly. Beautifully said.
So then gratitude takes us into courage. And courage, I already mentioned just a little bit, but I do think about courage as being, I wrestled with this a bit, as being like bravery. It's bravery is a step towards courage,
Yeah.
but courage has some level of selflessness towards it.
Mhm.
You're doing it for some greater purpose, or you're doing it to help others, or you're willing to put something of yourself on the line.
Yeah.
And so there's a spiritual aspect to that of what it takes to be courageous. And it's one of those things I feel like we all want to be courageous. That's why we love like movies where
Yeah.
with heroes, they're all so courageous. And don't we want to be like that? But it's a muscle we have to practice because again, we have to get out of kind of that animalistic self preservation mode.
Mhm.
Um, and there's little things we can do to practice those muscles of courage.
Yeah.
And then that takes us into the last characteristic, which is about meaning.
Mm.
And meaning is one of those things that we all long for, look for. And I talk about it as micro meaning and macro meaning.
Mhm.
The micro meaning is, what did she mean when she said that?
Mhm.
And I don't know what to make out of the fact that she just made that face at me. And why is he not returning my text? It's like those are micro meaning moments where we're making meaning out of everything, out of the way we read each other, the absence of how we can read each other. That's also why the remote, like never being in person, is so also transactional. It's like we don't know how to read each other's energy nearly as
Right.
well, and we make meaning out of that.
Mhm.
And that's that micro meaning. And then macro meaning is more of the big questions. What am I doing with my talent and my skills and my gifts? And am I living the life I want to live? And am I being who I want to be? What is the meaning of life? Because we do also long for that kind of purpose.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's the last characteristic of the
Oh,
innate self.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for sending me the book. I'm so
Yeah.
excited to read it. Oh, I can't wait. So you said on the third characteristic connection, you said you spent a lot of time here. Can
Yeah.
you give us a little bit of like some tangible steps, like of how we can connect more with ourselves and others? If you want to share a little few nuggets from the book or just anything
Yeah.
that's coming to you.
Sure. So, yeah, so you just said something key, which is connection. We need to think about on two dimensions. It's how do I connect with myself? And
Hmm.
then how am I connecting with others? On the self piece, it's an interesting thing. I think as we get older, we tell ourselves that we have to be very serious. And that's what growing up means. And one of the ways I think that we can connect with ourselves the most is by rediscovering what brings you little tiny moments of joy.
Yeah.
Like where do you have fun? And what does that look like? And I don't mean like on a binger with your friends. I mean like with yourself, right? Where
Yeah.
do you enjoy you? And can you enjoy spending time alone? And I think this one's so important because I've worked with a lot of people who, and this gets into a little bit more therapy than coaching, but who have a very hard time being alone.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, what I have found just from a coaching lens, I won't speak from the therapeutic side, but is when they're spending time alone, they're spending all of their time in their mind.
Mhm.
And that friend of me up there that has we have some roommates that live in there, and I talk about like the four roommates that I've seen most common live in people's heads, and one of them is a bully. I mean, it's like our we have a critic in there that really likes to tell us and replay all of the mistakes we've made. And so like just noticing if we can't get out of our heads. And that's why also like physicality is so important, exercising, doing things that get us in our body, that can get us out of our minds, great way of connecting. But where do you have some fun? So that's the first piece. And I'll start there with a little bit of lightness. And then connecting with each other, I think noticing where you may struggle to connect, meaning what are you afraid of? And is fear and or self-protection stopping you from wanting to connect? And I say this because I think this is where a lot of people may be stuck. Kind of post-pandemic is like, I don't know how to make new friends. I'm worried, and like unpacking what some of that protection in our minds is protecting us from, I think is a key part of like getting out of our own ways to in order to connect. But
Mhm.
connection is this is something I feel so passionate about right now. Connection is beyond ideology. There's this beautiful Rumi poem that I like absolutely love, and I'll try to get it exactly right, but just like out beyond the idea of right doing and wrong doing, there lies a field, and I'll meet you there.
Mm.
And I think that that's connection. It's like we may agree ideologically, we may have the same belief system, we may not, and despite any of that, we can connect. And
Yeah.
I think like this is something I think that's so important right now, as we think about like where we are, even politically, is how do we connect besides ideology,
Mhm.
beyond ideology. And so practicing little moments of kindness and joy and laughter with your fellow human is good for the soul. So that's a little bit around the connection piece, is kind of noticing where your barriers are and finding ways to connect that may not just be through, thinking.
What a powerful reflection. Like anyone listening to this, like take 5 minutes after listening to this episode and just find yourself in what you just said. Like that quote, it was so powerful because such a simple quote, but it packs so much meaning.
I think this is one of maybe the fallacies that we tell ourselves, is like people are really simple,
Yeah.
when I think that people are really complex. But it's really simple to connect.
Yes.
It's just, let's not make that part complex.
Mm.
We can be complex in so many ways. And I talk about like exploring paradoxes, because I think on the one hand, we love to connect. On the other hand, we're terrified of connecting. Like there's all
Yeah.
these paradoxes that live in us. But I think if we simplify the connection piece of, this is why doing things that are outside of language and ideology are so key. Like go do a little volunteerism and
Mhm.
just serve next to somebody and see if you don't feel some connection to the people that you're either serving or the people that you're working with serving other people. And you may not have any conversation, and it still, you still feel that connection. So there's these things that we can do that really help foster that sense of, what it feels like to be in lockstep with our common fellow humans.
Yeah.
um, and it would be good for us to get a little out of our heads about it, I think.
Yeah, of course. And we talk a lot about energy in our house of like, you could walk because we have animals too. And we were just talking about it this morning, like how our cat was like purring and, petting our hair, but like with her paw, like she was just trying to like nuzzle closer to us. And I brought up the energy. I'm like, we can't talk to our cat, but you know that there's love here, there's connection here. And yeah, my 6-year-old woke up an hour earlier than normal. So we
Mm.
had nice snuggles on the couch this morning, but yeah, for sure.
But to your point though, like kids are actually so good at this. They're so
Yeah.
intuitive on this stuff. My almost 3-year-old has never met a stranger. And while as a mother I might be somewhat terrified of that, I learn a lot from that, because he will look at someone and they'll be an adult and he'll be like, "What's that kid doing?" He sees everybody as a kid.
Oh,
And he will literally like run up to them and like give them flowers. Like he just is so naturally inclined to want to connect. And I think to myself, like, oh, he's a little sage for me. Like I am not like here I am wanting to and trying to help people. And yet I myself get in my own head about some of
yeah,
it, right? That's just how we are. We're complex, but
yeah.
but there are things we can do, and like I think children are actually great little muses if we let them be.
Oh, of course. Of course. My goodness, that's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
Um, so what do you hope readers will take away from your book?
Oh, there's so many things I want
I
people
know.
to take away. I
Loaded
think
question.
that, yeah, the first thing I want people to have is a better sense of understanding
Mm,
of how they think about themselves. And I really think in the world of personal development, there has been a missing component to the self.
mhm,
And I talked about that earlier, mind, body, and emotion, and we keep it all there. But we are mind, body, emotion, and spirit. And if that it may be uncomfortable to use that language, that's okay. It's your innate self. Let's talk about it that way.
yeah.
And let's make it a little bit more tangible, and let's have some characteristics that we can look at, and get it out of the esoteric into something that we can actually digest and unpack. And I mean, if I can do that, then like I've done my job.
Hmm.
But I think on a more like personal level, it's also my hope to give a little bit more space and grace.
Mm,
Like, I think we are so hard on ourselves, and there is a there is a beauty in trying to push and cultivate ourselves that I think a lot of times maybe our internal critic is coming from that angle of trying to help us like learn and grow, but took a turn somewhere into being a little bit of a taskmaster and just like constantly telling us what we're doing wrong. And I think if we can see ourselves from a higher nature perspective and remind ourselves of not just the humanness in us, but the spark within us,
mhm,
the thing that longs for light and joy and purpose, we can give ourselves a little bit more space to grow without all of the pressure of our failure
mhm.
and that kind of mentality. um and I think we'll all be more gracious towards each other if we can give ourselves a little bit of more space to unpack the unfolding that it is to be a human.
Mhm.
So that's also what I hope to give on a more individual level.
Yeah. I can talk to you for hours. I enjoy this conversation so much. Where can we find you? Where can we find you? Where can we support you? Purchase your book. Tell us all about
Yes. Thank you for asking. So I have a website, innateself.com. You can also find me as Innate Coach on Instagram. And my book is now on Amazon, which I'm very excited about. The Innate Self on Amazon.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much for just your time and space and energy to be here on the show with us today. I enjoyed this conversation immensely.
Well, so did I, Jenna. Thank you so much for having me. I feel like we're kindred spirits, and I really appreciate the chance to connect, and hope that other people enjoyed this conversation too.
Yes, and I will link everything in the show notes where to find your book, your website, Instagram. And thank you again so much. Until next week, as always, simply be you. You have everything inside of you, our dear listeners, to learn your energy of alignment and be unapologetic in who you are. We are sending our love and light.
Did you find this episode free or empowering? Please read my review. Tickle, 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 boop.
Thank you for spending this sacred time with me on Naturally Empowered Living. If this episode brought you closer to stepping into your energy of alignment, I'd love for you to leave a written review and share how this show has supported your journey. Your feedback truly lights me up and helps others find the space of transformation. And sharing it with someone who might need it spreads the ripple of healing even further. Be sure to check the show notes for ways to connect with me and explore personalized healing sessions and mentorships to deepen your self-awakening journey. Thank you. I appreciate all you are and all you do.